Do you remember when you were a child and you sat at the feet of your grandfather or grandmother or somebody in your family that was a really good storyteller, and they just told you a story and you just listened? So my grandfather was in the Navy, and he told me a story of when he sent one of his colleagues files, a file which without it this man could not be paid, and he had no identification with him on which to buy groceries or food or anything when they were at a port. He sent that file to Timbuktu, and he did so because the man had kind of bullied one of my grandfather's friends, and he saw it fit to react in that way. And I remember never thinking about the problematic aspects of the story or the beautiful construction or if there was anything particularly amazing to take away from the story. I just enjoyed the dang story. I can remember how the night felt, the temperature, what I was wearing, the fire, the s'mores still stuck on my hands. And I remember that because that's what storytelling does. It just brings you out of reality and brings you somewhere else. And it doesn't have to be something to take away from. It doesn't have to be cerebral. It can just be an experience, a beautiful experience that maybe doesn't change your philosophy, but it changes something inside of your heart. In this discussion of the Tempest, I ask you to just listen. Let me tell you a story. I'll involve you in the ways that I can in this technological forum, but I just want you to listen, to experience, and hopefully to enjoy. My father is a merchant, the truth I now will tell, and in great London city, in opulence doth dwell. His fortune doth exceed 200,000 gold, and he frowns upon his daughter, who loves a sailor bold. If by your art, my dearest father, you have put the wild waters in this roar, allay them. The sky, it seems, would pour down stinking pitch, but that the sea, mounting to the welkin's cheek, dashes the fire out. Oh, I have suffered with those that I saw suffer. Brave vessel, who had no doubt some noble creature in her, dashed all to pieces. No harm. I have done nothing but in care of thee, my dear one, thee, my daughter, who art ignorant of what thou art, not knowing of whence I am. This dialogue you just heard from Miranda and Prospero is the first time we hear from these characters in the play. This dialogue is also host to a rhetorical device that I think is really useful in framing how the Tempest operates in its construction. Now, later in this visual podcast extravaganza, we're going to be talking about the nebulousness of this play and how it's really hard to pinpoint and being okay in that storm. But right now, before we really get into the mysteriousness of it, I want to ground us in the rhetorical devices of the language, just to give us a solid foundation on which we can frame the rest of this talk. The rhetorical device that we're going to take a deep dive into today for the Tempest is called parenthesis. I know. What? You've never heard of such a word? It's actually one of my favorites, other than parallipsis, which is my all-time favorite. I like it because it is so recognizable even to the layman, even to people who may not be steeped in rhetorical devices. It is widely recognized because it's set off by parentheses. Now, a parenthesis functions as, I kind of like to think of it as a grammatical safety net, right? You put additional information that doesn't mess up the flow of the rest of the sentence. You put corrections, amplifications, asides. It really is a catch-all for things that the character may personally be going through as an aside to themselves or to the audience that they don't share with the person in front of them. And the dialogue between Miranda and Prospero is host to the first bit of parenthesis that we see in this play. From Miranda, who had no doubt some noble creature in her, this parenthesis is interesting because it's acting as a setup for her curiosity, her sensual curiosity. She's on the precipice of adulthood. She's longing for somebody or something else, and we see that in this little parenthesis. And Prospero, we see it as well, of thee, my dear one, of thee, my daughter. Now, something that's really interesting about Prospero and parenthesis is that when you look in the folio, there are around 100 instances of the parenthesis. Now, 50% of these are divided up amongst the rest of the characters. Ferdinand, Ariel, Miranda, Gonzalo, Sebastian, etc. They all use a little bit of parenthesis. Prospero, though, has the entire other 50%, and he uses it in very distinct, eye-opening ways. I'm going to show you a few examples of Prospero using parenthesis in vastly different manners. The first one is at the very beginning of the play when he is telling Miranda a story. He asks, "Dost thou attend me?" And in the folio, it is in parenthesis, and I think it is so telling and so interesting that it is, because not only is it an aside back to Miranda of, "Are you listening?" I think it also acts as an aside to the audience and an aside to himself. Is the audience listening? Is anybody even caring about my story? The second example is when Prospero is reminding Ariel and telling the audience how he found Ariel. And he was woven into a cloven pine, which is one of the most beautiful visuals, even though it sounds painful. Anyways, parenthesis is used here to express utter disdain, and it also acts as an interruption to his own story. And he's talking about Caliban in this. So he says, "As fast as mill wheels strike, then was this island, save for the sun that he did litter here, a freckled whelp, hag-born." So the parenthesis is acting again as a grammatical safety net in which Prospero gets to interrupt his own story, reminding and scolding Ariel, telling the audience a story, to jab in his overwhelming hatred towards Caliban. The third example comes much later in the play. Prospero says, "These three have robbed me, and this demi-devil, for he's a bastard one, had plotted with them to take my life." So this parenthesis acts much like the prior in that it holds some disdain, but I also think it is additional information carried here, letting them know of how Caliban was conceived. It also is fairly humorous, and again, it's interrupting his own story. A lot of times, parenthesis for Prospero, I think, acts as an age signifier for him. He gets distracted in his own stories a lot, needing to correct himself. And though he is in control, I suppose, of this plot from the beginning, his humanness shows through in these moments of parenthesis. The final instance of parenthesis that we'll be looking at happens right after Ariel uses some excellent human and inhuman rhetoric to convince Prospero to not continue imprisoning or killing or wanting to kill the people on his island, his brother, and the people that came with him. Ariel, after he has a delicious paralipsis of "Mine would, sir, were a human," talking about how he would feel looking at the prisoners, Prospero says, "And mine shall, hast thou, which art but air, a touch, a feeling of their afflictions, and shall not myself, one of their kind, that relish all as sharply passion as they, be kindlier moved than thou art?" This parenthesis holds only 4 words, "which art but air." But in this parenthesis, we see Prospero's own inward analysis of what Ariel has just roundabout confronted him with. Up until this point, Prospero on the island has perhaps become quite detached from humanity, and certainly he was set so much on revenge, and revenge so easily, we see in literature and in life, can take over your humanity quickly. But this parenthesis, he realizes the separation. There's Prospero, the human, and then there's the air, there's the non-humanness, there's the revenge, there's the emptiness that was coming with the prior motivations he had. I know what you all are thinking. Are we not gonna get to see Professor England's face? Let me tell you something right now. Out of all of the things that I have disappointed people in my life with, my face is not one of them. So right now we're going to do a little activity with parenthesis, of course. Now, some of you may be thinking, parenthesis, not a big deal. I know I've just showed you some of Prospero's ways in which he uses parenthesis, and maybe you're like, bleh. Simple, no big deal. Give me that anadiplosis, give me that isocolon, give me diacope, give me epizeuxis, give me those really hard words and that weird rhetoric. I mean, parenthesis is too simple. Wrong. We're going to explore some of the acting options that you have when there is a parenthesis. Now, first, we need to have a frank discussion about something. I'm using the folio for this because, frankly, after many editors have handled the text, they take out things, they add things where they don't need to. The parenthesis is taken out of a majority of the text in the Arden, at least. So the text we'll be looking at right now for exploring parenthesis is "For He's a Bastard One." That is not in parenthesis in the Arden. And I just want to say that that is a mistake. So I'm editing this right now. Obviously, I'm in my PJs. Perks of a virtual classroom. My PJs are so beautiful. Anyways, I realized that open source Shakespeare, MIT, I think Riverside and the Arden, instead of parenthesis, do have an M dash, which operates slightly in the same way. So I just wanted to point that out, that they didn't take out grammatical safety points. I don't want to lead you astray. However, M dashes are not a rhetorical device, so just needed to point that out. So what we're going to do now is kind of twofold. We're going to be exploring 2 ways in which you can treat a parenthesis. We're also just going to see how it is without a parenthesis and see which one you like better. It's going to be the one with a parenthesis. So how we're going to do this in this visual format is I'm going to look at the screen awkwardly, sip my coffee, give you a chance to say out loud without a parenthesis, and then the 2 ways with a parenthesis. I'll explain more when we get there, but I want you to be doing it out loud. After a few seconds, I will do it to show you how it's done. Now remember, a parenthesis is that grammatical safety net where it's an aside, it's an amplification, it's a difference, and without a parenthesis, it's just part of a sentence. Remember. Okay, please read from "His mother was a witch" down to "take my life" without a parenthesis. Now I'm going to read it. I'm just going to read from "These three have robbed me" down to "Take my life." Okay. Without parenthesis. These three have robbed me, and this demi-devil, for he's a bastard one, had plotted with him to take my life. It's fine. It's boring. Let's do it with parenthesis now, shall we? One of the ways in which Prospero uses parenthesis, as we have seen, is to insert his disdain, and it's usually towards Caliban, which is no different in this situation. So we'll read it as such. Please just read from "These three have robbed me" to "take my life," with disdain filling in that delicious parenthesis. Go ahead. This is probably really awkward for you if you're done and I'm just here staring at the camera. So I'm going to cut everybody off there. All right. So I hope you fill the word bastard with as much disdain as possible. Like this. These three have robbed me, and this demi-devil, for he's a bastard one, had plotted with him to take my life. The last one is going to act for this as somewhat of a comic aside or a comic fill-in of information, right? So that's what the parenthesis is for an amplification or a correction, additional information, or an aside. So we're going to kind of combine a lot of those into one. And what I mean by that is pretend like you're talking to Alonzo and you forgot to tell him that Caliban is also a bastard. So it's like, yes, also he's a bastard, and so on. So it's like an additional information. I think it'll probably put some interesting ways in which to explore the comedy in this. Go ahead from "These three have robbed me" to "take my life." Great. So, these three have robbed me, and this demi-devil, for he's a bastard one, had plotted with him to take my life. It's not my best, but it'll do. You see, so parenthesis can be misconstrued as not being that special just because it is so common. We see it all the time. It's very easily recognizable, but there's so many ways in which to explore inside of a parenthesis. That grammatical safety net, make your cliff jump higher because you've got a net to land into. You've got an ocean to land into because it's the Tempest. So we've seen how Prospero uses parenthesis. And I just want to explain now why parenthesis is such an excellent rhetorical device in understanding the Tempest. You've seen how he uses it. He uses it to show disdain, to show changing his mind. And because parenthesis allows for that grammatical safety net of expressing your inner conflict, it operates so well in the Tempest. Because the Tempest, in essence, though Prospero is controlling the plot per se, he is not all in control of his emotions. So at the onset of this play, he's seeking revenge, and it changes, and we see that change a lot in the moments of parenthesis. So I just gave you a deep dive into the ocean of parenthesis, and I will probably use a lot of ocean metaphors throughout this entire thing just because I can't help myself. So we just took a deep dive. We're resurfacing now. And I want to use the Tempest as a platform to talk about a little bit broader of a subject, just as important. It's your editing professor again, professor that is editing. Active voice. Anyways, this next section of the video, as I had mentioned before, it's about the nebulousness of the Tempest, and it's also about embracing a story for what it is and not imprinting ourselves onto it all of the time, especially if there's problems with it. That doesn't mean we have to reject it. Now, let me just tell you, I am really passionate and also really moody about this subject. So in this next section, if I sound like Hamlet, being really moody and upset about things you may find trivial, that is why. I almost didn't include it because I was like, no, I need to keep it lighthearted. I need to keep it relevant and cool and blah, blah. But I am not cool. I color coordinated my bookshelf. I am not a cool person at all. So, enjoy this next part and know that I feel passionate about it, and I'm very passionate about sharing this with you. Yeah, okay. So often in Shakespeare, we seek so diligently to make meaning, find a purpose for the play that we're reading. And it's merited. So many of Shakespeare's plays have survived for so long because they are applicable, they are relatable, they're meaningful. And I'm not saying that The Tempest isn't that way. What I am saying, though, is The Tempest is a nebulous creature. And I have found in talking to people about The Tempest, when somebody is not sure about something and it's nebulous and it's difficult to put your finger on, they just tend to dislike it instead. But I want to press against that with you all today. In the nebulousness of the Tempest, the way that it is, the way that it's structured, the characters within it, the plot or lack thereof, I want us to embrace the nebulousness and appreciate it for what it is. I read an article by Robert Pierce called Understanding the Tempest, and the basis of it was we try to make meaning out of something, and it's purposefully in a dichotomy. We have Prospero, who all at once is usurped and done wrong and protecting his daughter, while also over-sheltering his daughter, over-protecting his daughter, controlling, and seeking revenge. This kind of dichotomy we can place on every single one of the characters. The plot itself is difficult because it goes in between a revenge tragedy and a redemption comedy, romance perhaps. But this dichotomy is okay. Yeah, we don't necessarily have to take away some huge picture from it, right? I think we're guilty a lot in being era egocentric with Shakespeare. I think The Taming of the Shrew falls into this as well. The Taming of the Shrew is a beautiful, beautiful story, excellent language, gorgeous moments, hilarious moments. It has problems, but people focus so much on those problems that they lose the beauty of the play, and it's a shame. And I think The Tempest can easily fall into those cracks as well, because Prospero is kind of controlling the plot from the very beginning. So the drama in it is harder to pinpoint. It deals with rough, hard to swallow instances of prejudice and otherness between Caliban and the rest of the characters. It deals with sibling rivalry and at the precipice of sensuality and sexuality for Miranda, and needing her father to perhaps grant her permission to be able to enter into that aspect of her life. But there is a significant amount of beauty in The Tempest too. But I think the biggest clue in understanding The Tempest is the name. Tempest. Look at the ocean in a storm. The movements, the waves. It's being an ocean. There's nothing particularly meaningful about it. It just is what it is, and it's beautiful in its own right. It's powerful in its own right. perhaps it's even frightening in it as well. This is Shakespeare's last play that he wrote by himself. And I think in this, we can find something interesting at least. And perhaps this is conjecture on my part, and perhaps it's trying to make a point, but I'm going to go with it. I think Shakespeare is calling us to just listen and to be able to be mature enough in our literary or theatrical digestion of pieces to be able to let a piece stand as itself, perhaps with no imprints from us or from our culture or from our society. Let the story be its own individual. Let it just be. Let it breathe and please you, as Prospero says, and draw near and indulge. We are nearing the end of our time together on this virtual platform, and I just realized that my bun is increasingly becoming a dunghill, so I'm nearing the end of the night. Okay, we'll just do that. Anyways, I hope in this lesson that we've had together that you have learned something about parenthesis, which you should have, because I shoved a lot of information and opinions about parenthesis down your throats, so that's always a good way. And the Tempest has some really cool instances of how parenthesis is used, especially with Prospero, as an age signifier, as, a way to say the word bastard, which everybody needs sometimes. And in the latter portion, I sincerely hope it challenged you to unchallenge yourself. So a few things of what I said, well, a lot of what I said about just letting the story be and not having to make an application goes against a lot of what I believe about Shakespeare, in that I think Shakespeare is one of the most perceptive, interdisciplinary tools that we have. I think from ecology to business to psychology, when you are able to use Shakespeare in the ways that you all are, equipped to do, frankly, with your knowledge background, it just enhances the experience and our understanding of it. But when I mean challenge you to unchallenge yourself, Shakespeare it wasn't meant for always being cerebral and having to have an application. Sometimes being able to just listen to a story and laugh and cry and be confused and maybe be angry is just as important as being able to apply the Tempest to some greater philosophical, new historicist philosophy. And frankly, I think it's more important. Yes. So, that is my soapbox. I hope you are able to simplify sometimes the way that you listen to stories. Okay. Be cheerful, sir. Our revels now are ended. These are actors, as I foretold you. We're all spirits and are melted into air, into thin air. And, like the baseless fabric of this vision, the cloud-capped towers, the gorgeous palaces, the solemn temples, the great globe itself, yea, all which it inherit, shall dissolve, and like this insubstantial pageant faded, leave not a wreck behind. We are such stuff as dreams are made on, and our little life is rounded with a sleep.